it seems like there's a lot of strong evidence that we do go on after our physical death, and there is a higher power, and it isn't a religion like that you have to be Christian or Muslim or anything. It's universal, and and even atheists, we're all included in it, and it's kind of beyond our control or what we believe or don't believe, and so.
I'd like to welcome Ned Matinnia. Ned, I'm very excited to have you join us today. Your interview is a little bit different because you haven't had an NDE yourself, but you've formed the largest Facebook group that I know of to date as well about near-death experiences. So I'd like to go into that. But you're also a medium, so that's fascinating to me. So before we start with all of that, if you could just give us a bit of background about your childhood and what led you up to being interested in near-death experiences.
Thank you, Natasha. My pleasure to be here. And yes, in my experience, um, as a kid, I had a traumatic and painful childhood, and I've always had a scientific mindset. So perhaps I was blessed to not have a religious childhood where a religion was imposed on me. I was always kind of encouraged to be scientific and fact-based and all of this. And so, but I'll add, if you combine that and also having a traumatic childhood and not having a healthy or functional family and not having close friends and supporters, and then you add onto that the common scientific belief, which is still active, which is that we are all just a random accident, and there is no soul or intuition or afterlife. There is no mediumship or NDEs. It's all just fantasy. And so when I went to high school and I had my biology classes, I learned about evolution in more detail. And I thought, well, this explains it all. We're just a random accident and there's no purpose. And I saw a lot of the hypocrisy in kids, but also adults, especially like on the news or seeing parents who, it's almost like how children are taught about the truth fairy or Santa Claus, and then you reach a certain age and you realize, oh, it was all just a lie, and so on a larger level, I felt like that about even things like religion or um, anything that went beyond the materialistic framework. And when I say materialistic, I don't mean like a person who's interested in buying a lot of things. I mean that the only thing that exists is material atoms, and there isn't anything else. And so in that belief system, which is still extremely prevalent in academia, in the medical world, it's that, that when our body dies and our brain dies, we completely die and are extinguished forever. And there is no higher virtues or reason to be kind or compassionate. So in the view I had it, and I think a lot of smart people that currently have this, it's that, well, if you're compassionate or kind, it's a nice thing, but ultimately there isn't any foundational reason to do that. And so people who are in power, who are interested in stepping over others to advance ahead, a lot of them are smart and shrewd, but they completely believe that there is no consequences beyond that and after this whole lifetime. And so I felt like that, and I felt like when you don't have a happy childhood, you don't have close friends, and if life is just a random accident, then why even be here? And on top of that, like on the personal level, it was what was on the news and the current events, and I felt like humanity was like hopeless. Like, how come people they keep having all these fights and arguments over and over again? I felt like an alien on this earth. Like this place is so barbaric at times, and so. Um, it was in high school. I started really searching for any spiritual or wisdom. I was like, well, is there anything that can kind of explain life? And so in terms of my experience learning about the world religions, Eastern religions, Western religions. I learned about the Abrahamic religions a little bit or a lot, and then I learned about Hinduism, Taoism, um, Buddhism, and I found it interesting to compare a lot of what people around the world were saying, including the indigenous tribes and traditions. And I felt like, especially in the Upanishads and the Vedas from ancient India, they taught God or a bliss or an unexplainable force or entity which is beyond all concepts. And that in I thought, is there any evidence in that? And um, in that whole journey is when I then came across near death experiences, and I came across Paramhansa Yogananda, things like, when he was an infant, he remembers other lifetimes. He remembers, or he had experiences of cosmic consciousness and of seemingly impossible physical in nature. And so that was an eye opener. And then I came across Life After Life. It was hugely impacted me because it was almost like a perhaps a memory or a sense that there is higher power, or there are our physical selves. And so in high school, I started to think about a way out, like suicide, because I felt like life would just be a continuation of high school. And high school for me, and middle school especially, were painful, and there wasn't any redeeming qualities. I didn't look forward to a career and an education and all that, because what's the point if life it seemed utterly hopeless. And so it wasn't until I learned about the near-death experiences in, in Life After Life, and then other books, and eventually on YouTube, that it completely turned all of that around, because it was like a reminder that it seems like there's a lot of strong evidence that we do go on after our physical death, and there is a higher power, and it isn't a religion like that you have to be Christian or Muslim or anything. It's universal. And and even atheists, we're all included in it, and it's kind of beyond our control, or what we believe or don't believe. And so um, and then eventually I came across mediums, like here in the US we have James Van Prague, Alison Dubois, John Edward, and several other famous ones. I know in the UK there's a famous one, Lisa Williams, I think. And I would sometimes watch their shows out of fascination, almost like a science experiment, like seeing what happened. Is it possible that they're cheating somehow, or is it all real? Like, how does it all work? And so in my mind, I was trying to analyze everything. And then I saw Alison Dubois in person in Denver, it was like 100 or 200 people in a fancy hotel. And, I looked around and I didn't see any earpieces or cheating going on. It seemed like it was authentic. And when the information came through, some people were started crying and tearing up, and they were passing the tissues around, which showed that it was hitting on accurate information. And I thought, wow, this is so fascinating. And and then in my mind, I'm trying to analyze how people could exist, in spirit, and talk to us and all of this. And so, but see, all of that changed my whole perspective, because my perspective had been that we're all just a random accident and there is no meaning or purpose. And then from near-death experiences and mediums, they say, well, the purpose is to love, to grow our souls, that we're all in this together, no matter what religion or country or economic status or orientation or anything. These are all a smart system, a smart way of intelligent way of how things work. And so I had that awakening in learning about the mediums in near-death experiences. And then, if you've heard of IANDS, which is the International Association for Near-Death Studies, I came across their website in 2012, and I saw that there was a conference upcoming in Scottsdale, Arizona, which is basically in Phoenix, Arizona. And I signed up immediately because I thought, wow, this is all about near-death experiences, and it's in person, and and perhaps I'll meet some people that I've seen on YouTube and the internet. And I did. And the conference, it happens every year. It's almost always over Labor Day weekend. And actually last month I was over there in Chicago. And then last year I was over there in Phoenix, because it was also in Phoenix. And next year, for anyone interested, it'll be in Seattle. But it was meeting those people who were in those car accidents or hit by lightnings or drowned, and seeing them in person, and talking to them, and hearing about how their perspective on life has changed, or a lot of them now have like extremely strong intuition, even if they never believed in intuition before. And so you could talk to people who would sometimes either know things about you that are impossible, or about the future, or just kind of have these insights that normal or typical people don't have. And they have a much broader perspective too, because of what happened in their experience. It's like most of society is living in these typical boxes of how we're kind of taught, and we are raised. And then when you have a near-death experience or something similar, it's like it opens up the whole box. And I always appreciated to being around them. And so, and then, it almost becomes a sense of family, because it's not just an intellectual conference. Near-death experiencers are often, their hearts are opened up. And so you can meet a person in a hallway who had a near-death experience, and they can have a look at you almost like as if they know you, even if you never met, and a sense of just like that empathy and compassion. And so there's a lot of hugs, a lot of family. I call it the NDE family. And so it's beautiful. And a year after I attended that conference in Scottsdale, Arizona in 2012, on Facebook, I created a group and I just called it Near Death Experiences. And because I felt ever since I learned about NDEs, that is my biggest passion in life, because that's what basically saved my life. It was like, well, I needed a reason to live. Here it is. And this reason is for all of us. And even more, like there is such a bias that is still against it, but we've been improving over time. But a lot of the medical world, a lot of the academic world are still either ignoring a lot of the new evidence, or just they keep repeating the same, well, we figured it out. These are lack of oxygen, etc. We've heard this for decades, and the evidence actually contradicts that. It's more complicated. Like we don't actually have a clear explanation of what these are, and how people can come back or wake up and know things that they didn't previously know, or have abilities or even electrical after effects that are unexplainable. Um, and so when I created the group on Facebook in on September 15th of 2013, I just had a thought, well, I want a place to put articles and videos and just kind of consolidate, organize some information. And then over time, it started growing organically. And so people would begin to join and ask questions about NDEs, or experiencers would join and say, this is what happened to me when I was in the car accident. And over time, it grew and grew, and it changed from a place for me to just put articles and stuff to a place where now I'm kind of moderating. Everyone else is posting, and I'm just ensuring that there's no arguments, there's no bickering or unfairness happening, and trying to keep it a healthy ecosystem. And initially, it was 1,000 members, and then 10,000 members, and then up to 50,000 members, and up to 100,000 members, and then now it's almost 275,000 members. And some groups on Facebook are larger, but there are caveats. And so, because my group, we focus on the near-death experiences alone, and there are some that are more just in general about spirituality or the afterlife, and a lot of them you don't even have to apply for a process of joining. You click on join and you're in. We have to approve everyone who wants to enter, and so it's a more stringent process. However, I always post in the group, it's about quality over quantity. And on Facebook and on the internet, there are a lot of scammers and other fakers out there that we have to kind of screen out. And so, I now have a team of people who we all kind of moderate. And I have seen a lot of, hundreds or thousands of posts and comments and just all kinds of experiences. Um, and so I've learned a lot about just the overall nature of NDEs in general. Um, in terms of what is common and what's unusual, and what people can typically expect. Like an example is when an experiencer returns, sometimes it's almost like such a high and such an amazing experience that they're like, this was the most incredible thing ever. I feel like I'm Jesus or something, because I don't know how this happened. It feels like magic, and which is beautiful and fun, but also I've seen a trend of sometimes it takes a process of realizing, oh, I'm not the only one who's had this happen. Like, I don't have all the answers, even though people they talk about when they're in spirit, they can often have instant answers to any question. But when they come back, they often will say that our brains, our physical human brains, they kind of limit the amount of information we could retain. And so it's a process of integration afterwards, because it's like I have this amazing or profound experience, and now how do I live it in my daily life? And a lot of relationships have to go through adjustment periods, because people will often say that when an experiencer comes out of an NDE, they almost are like a changed person. Oftentimes their values or their hobbies can change, and sometimes the person that people expected of them has now been transcended. And one of the biggest things I see in the group is especially in the United States, there's a lot of Christian influence, and so there are people who ask, like, "Am I going to go to hell?" Or because I did such and such, or am I going to go to hell because I don't believe in Jesus? Or and what often happens is the experiencers will come in and explain it's not about that. It's not about um, our fears and the kind of dogmas out there. And so a lot of it is just I pray about it also. I pray that the group helps the world and helps people. And that's why it's a public group. I could have made it private, and there are a lot of private NDE groups out there, and I'm in a lot of them. But the purpose of my group is to reach the people who are just curious or hearing this for the first time, and they're like, and so what happens is if perhaps someone in the family will join the group and post a comment, and then their friend or family will see that and be like intrigued, and then they'll join, because it's kind of a topic that we don't really hear much about in school or the business world or in typical family conversations. So, in all of that, I've seen a lot, I've learned a lot. If you have any specific questions about that, I'd love to go into, and I'll talk about my mediumship also.
Well, that is amazing that it's grown so big, hey? And all organically as well. I mean, I'm on the group. I've been on your group for good 5 years or so. So yeah,
Oh,
I
wow.
like to follow the posts and the stories. You were saying that a lot of the NDE has come back and they've changed, but it seems like it has affected you as well. Because I have changed just being around people whose hearts are open myself. And I haven't even met them in person. I've just met a lot of them online. Do you think that's also part of it?
Um, Dr. Kenneth Ring, who's a longtime NDE researcher who is one of the original members of IANDS, he calls it NDEs are like a benevolent virus, and so once it infects you, it'll infect everyone else or who comes in contact with it because it is, but it's a benevolent one because it's that I call it the good news too. You know, in religion, especially in Christianity, there's often a saying about spreading the good news or the gospel, but I call NDEs like an even more realistic or more universal good news. It's like the good news that there is life after death. There is evidence about it. It's not just make believe. It's not just a fantasy, and it matters what we do here. To all the people who are incredibly smart, and a lot of them end up in positions of power because they often are power hungry. You probably have heard of articles about how studies show that a lot of psychopaths end up as CEOs or positions of power. And I don't want to make a light of that or kind of a judgment, but in terms of you break down the personality, a lot of people who are in positions of power, they get there because they are so power hungry and kind of driven. And I say this with the reason is that imagine if a lot of the leadership in the US and around the world had a near-death experience or learned about these and realized that this isn't just like it's not just a nice idea to be kind and stop hurting others or wars that are happening and killings happening. It's like if these people truly understood what near-death experiences are teaching us, it would all end. But because it hasn't ended yet, it means that we have like a disconnect, which has to be over time filled in. And it's that whole benevolent virus of realizing that these experiences are real and there is a reason to be kind because what we put out ends up oftentimes in our life review or even in, let's say, in karma or in our own lifetimes. It's actually more intelligent to be kind. And so I went on a tangent there, but yes, you're correct in that NDEs they changed my life completely. And I think early on I had talked to several mediums or people who have had NDEs, and they had sometimes told me that my energy, it felt like a person who's had one. And so even though I don't have any memories of it, either I came into this life with more of a awareness or remembrance of that, because as a kid, I had a hard time relating to other kids. And if you look at childhood experiencers, PMH Atwater did excellent studies on this, as did Dr. Melvin Morse, about children who've had NDEs and how they often come back with kind of the perspective of an adult, or they have a hard time fitting into the children mindset, And so I always had that. Like when I was a kid and the other kids were playing games or into the movies and whatnot, I often would be be wondering about the earth or the cosmos or how things all work and so or part of the reason I could have had a painful childhood as well is if that is all true and that I had some kind of experience or remembrance, which I feel I did, and then having that and then seeing the profound disconnect between how the world was and how people were, and it felt so empty and so uh, primitive and uncivilized because I felt like perhaps I had memories of a place where people were more in peace and more things were just better overall compared to here. And a lot of experiencers have said this is a school, it can be hard. And so a lot of experiencers as well, when they return, it's the integration process I said of it can take years or the whole lifetime afterwards of even depression or feeling suicidal because of that difference of how much beauty and amazingness that they felt versus how things are here and how people are here and how disillusioned it is often here. It's like you're in a place. My friend Ellen Dye, who had an NDE in a car crash, said in comparison to in spirit, when she came back here, it's like we are walking through hip deep molasses. It's like everything is slower, everything is harder. It's easier there. And so this whole topic of a lot of experiencers will sometimes have that depression or homesickness, and I hear that a lot. And realizing that we are here to bring more of that heaven or that love energy here, in all of our relationships and all of our interactions. And so, yeah, I said a lot there.
There's a lot, yeah. Yeah, I've actually interviewed Ellen a couple of months ago, Ellen Dye, and PMH as well, PMH at Halton, yeah. So they're lovely people.
Nice.
You know what I was thinking while you were talking is that I'll bring up my parents because they were typical for me. And I had the same experience as you did growing up. I just felt like I'd come from a better place. And this is so primitive. Like, what happened? I even told my mom that you're not my mother. Who's my real mother? And I didn't have a near-death experience. So I don't know if it was a consciousness thing or maybe we're part of the Dolores Cannon mentions the new wave of children that came in that have got more awareness. But yeah, very interesting. What my parents used to do is where they would have trouble or financial stress, because my parents went through a rough time when I was a teenager, they would go away and then everything would be great. And they'd just bury their head in the sand and they'd come back and life would still be happening. And it kind of feels like that, like when you've gone away, you don't have to worry about food or shelter. You know, you've gone to the other side, life's bliss. Well, it's great over that side. And now you've got to come back and deal with it. But I think that is what has been coming up as a recurring theme is that embodiment is can you bring the love down into earth and can we live that here? And that is the disconnect. It's about owning all that pain and all that grief and making peace with it or letting it go. Because I know that a lot of the ascended masters, and you were talking about Yogananda, is he did manage to do that. He managed to let go all that ego mind and find peace and be able to live forever, or however long he's been living for or lived for on earth. Do you think that's what it's about? That's just been my experience that I've witnessed myself.
Well, yeah, exactly. And if you've heard of Renee Passero, who her experience I think happened in the 80s or 90s, but there are videos of her on YouTube. Um, and I think it was either her or no, it could have been Anne. Trying to remember what her last name was, but uh, there's a video on YouTube, and it was an NDE. I think her name is Anne, and I think she was talking to either the international or local IANDS group, and she basically said, in her experience, I think it was either told to her, it was a clear message. She said, it's not about trying to ascend out of these bodies and leave this earth. And then she said, dear one, it's about being here and being the light because we are needed here. And I know as someone who I went through a spiritual journey, and this was after I read autobiography of a yogi. Within the spiritual world, there is a lot of beliefs and almost dogma about how the earth is a bad place and our goal is to ascend out of it. And but it seems like in NDEs that's actually not what is being recommended. It's actually, this isn't a bad place. This is a place we are here to bring that love in and that, our God selves, because we are co-creators and children of God. We have that love and light within us, and it's about expressing that here. And so it's often extremely difficult because our culture, our TV shows, I remember as a kid, I would often notice even, and it's still happening probably, but a lot of advertisements, a lot of movies and TV shows, they had an undercurrent, like a theme of kind of mocking anything that was pure or good. It was almost like, like in sitcoms, it's almost like the person who was trying to do something really pure and helpful would often be laughed at, almost like, life is just effed up and it's actually better to be more cynical because we're all kind of jaded. And that whole theme was so common. I remember in high school, and it's probably still happening because there's a lot of high school suicides, there's a lot of teenager bullying and drama. And, a common saying that I heard, it was, life sucks, then you die. So fuck the world and let's get high. And so that whole theme, like you said, about just ignoring it, like, as if Earth is a bad place and who cares if we just die? And it's almost like that idea that life is not precious, that it's meaningless, and this is how I used to think. It is about actually being our God selves, our full selves, and like you said, owning it. So all of our pain, all of our issues, if we had, let's say, history of, let's say, anger or depression, ultimately a lot of what's in our life is because of our choices. And so it's owning that and using the light and the inspiration and the memory of the other side to guide us. And that's the most important thing, because I hear so many NDEs and they talk about the accident and then what happened. And then it's like, okay, the big thing is now what? And so how can we use this? How can we actually, if we know that we're all in this together and that love is the answer, how can we start uniting more across the world? Because, and I've have NDE and medium friends who say that what's happening now, like in politics, in the governments, and whatnot, where there's a lot of fighting, is ultimately it's a you can call it a battle of light versus dark, or simply just love versus fear and lack of love. And so what's happening is a lot of the policies that are being happening in the United States right now are coming from a place of not love. And this is happening in other places in the world. And imagine if we, the people who've had experiences and those who understand the message, we all start realizing we can actually work together. Like, it's something I feel is important to address. There's a lot of almost like, I call it spiritual apathy or spiritual bypassing. It's almost like people like here in the US, we have our elections, and so many people don't vote because either they say it's all rigged or they say everything is all bad, so I'm not going to even participate. But in doing that, I'm not a political person, but just the reality of it is, look what's happening. It's like we have to, if we are constantly unengaging of the processes of how we live, which is politics ultimately, well then it just kind of goes off the rails. It's like we can get involved in a healthy way, in a spiritual way. Imagine having spiritual politics. Like, politics is not a bad word in itself. What's happened that I've seen is just so many people, including experiencers, are kind of checked out, just like they are checked out in a lot of the areas in their own lives. Of like, well, it's almost like accepting fatalistically what's happening and without remembering that we came here to change things and to to bring that heaven to earth. Imagine having a government or groups of people or communities, and there are lots of them. We can just increase that around the world up to national levels, even. Anything is possible. And a lot of experiencers have said ultimately we are here to improve things. And sometimes experiencers are given visions of the future, and I've heard all kinds. I've heard really dark ones or amazing ones, or a lot of them will say that we're going through a period of hardship and then it'll be amazing afterwards. And what the key is that nothing is set in stone. So the reason people are being shown a lot of variety is because it's up to us. And perhaps for someone in a certain area or country, in that particular area or country could be amazing, while someone in somewhere else is having a hard time. And so ultimately, it's just about, are we bringing that love and expressing it? Are we acting on it and not just talking about it or thinking about it? Because what's happened, let's say, for example, in the US, is there are policies which are really inhumane and treating people like animals or worse. And I know spiritual friends who even perhaps have had NDEs, and because of how turned off they are by all politics, when they could have stepped up and helped to prevent what's happening from happening, they actually chose to just ignore the whole thing. And in doing so, it's like when there's a bully, you can't just ignore. Like we see what happened with Hitler. Like it took everyone to say, all right, this is a real issue. We need to address it. And so, even though I'm not political, what's happening in the world now is a crisis for everyone. And so sometimes we need all hands on deck. And I love the message of NDEs. It's just like, it's not about hatred or hating Hitler, for example. It's about just stopping the damage, and even healing. Imagine if there was a police force of the future, which is more enlightened. Perhaps humanity in some years or hundreds of years had evolved to a point where we could have police officers who don't like insult or attack or curse at a criminal, but they just will peacefully handle it and stop them, and then actually encourage them and help them out. And I know a lot of governments, let's say in Europe and maybe other places, have law enforcement which tries to do that. It has a more healthy kind of rehabilitation mindset in comparison to what's happening in the United States, where it's kind of becoming, they're kind of encouraging a much more fear-based and hostile energy. That's a tangent. So,
Well, you're spot on, about the spiritual apathy, because I always say, well, evil flourishes when good men do nothing. It's when people say, they check out, just like I said about my parents, they just check out. Hope it'll go away, and then when it doesn't, you can complain about it. But if you are not participating in fixing it, then you're also part of the problem.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I feel like our biggest issue of our time, or our biggest current, let's say, collective lesson is, because we know that history repeats itself if we don't learn from it. And with so many people, just on their Netflix or just, on their personal bubbles, we kind of forget that we're all part of a larger ecosystem, and we're all on the earth as well. And so as our actions are causing more species extinctions, and the Amazon now, I've heard, because of how many fires are burning in the Amazon to clear out for farming and cheaper McDonald's burgers, or growing soybeans, all of this. Amazon forest, it used to be a carbon sink. It means that it would pull CO2 out of the atmosphere. And right now, because of so many fires, it's actually emitting more than it's taking in. And so it's almost like if you picture the lungs of a person are becoming more, blacker and unhealthier. And so it's it's important for us to realize, and I've seen in a lot of experiences, people are shown the earth as a whole or the cosmos, and that, the life is precious and the earth is precious. And the current idea or propaganda which is pushed on us is either you have a good economy or a good environment. You can't have both. It's completely untrue. the earth has so much abundance, and our artificial economy with all of our dollars and money is just a human construct. The real economy is the earth and the resources, and are we using them in a way that's sustainable and all this. And so I always encourage a simple empathy and care, empathy for plants and trees, for animals, for each other. um, and as someone who's seen a lot of near-death experiences in people, there's a huge spectrum, because sometimes it's just a really brief, like I was in the OR on the operating table, and for a few seconds I was on the ceiling, and then I was returned, and that's it. And then there are people who it felt like when they left their body, they were out for days or months or years of time, earth time, and they learned a lot and they were shown a lot. And so there's a huge spectrum. And so not all experiences are the same. And I say this not to judge them, but just in terms of, just because a person has had a near death experience, um, it can be like a spiritual growth spurt, but then it's, it doesn't make anyone enlightened or perfect. We're all learning here. And and that responsibility which you talked about, is so important, because the quicker we kind of unite and help each other and act in that love which they all talk about, the quicker we can have a happier and healthier world.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I'm not going to add to that because you've summed it all up beautifully. I wanted to ask you about your mediumship. Now, you started practicing that. What brought that about?
So ever since I started learning about it, and I saw James Van Prague, a TV show, and then also Alison Dubois in person, and I saw others, and then Teresa Caputo, the Long Island medium, her show I found incredibly inspiring as well. And I actually, in 2013, I visited my mom in Long Island area, and we actually found her town, which is Hicksville on Long Island. And my mom, we thought it would be a fun idea to actually make a list of all the places that she had stopped at and gave spontaneous readings, like in stores, and actually see if we could interview or talk to anyone who was there at the time, because I had a curiosity of, you know, was it all scripted, or was it all real? And so we actually found a few places, like an Italian market, a bakery, some other stores, and we did actually talk to some managers and workers there who were present at the time that she had walked in with her film crew. And they explained that, it was not scripted. So basically, all that happened was that Teresa, in her morning, would tell her crew which shops she was planning on shopping at or stopping at, and then ahead of time, they would call them and ask for permission to film. And so if they said yes, then they filmed, and if not, and so it was all authentic. And so, the scientist in me was amazed at that, and how cool. And her show I loved, because she had all kinds of people on there, and she talked to some bikers on Harley Davidson motorcycles, and who completely were not the type, and would just walk up to them, and sometimes if their parents were in spirit or whatnot, and tell them the accurate messages. And I found the healing of that was so beautiful and inspiring, and that's what the world needs more of. Because for me, and probably for everyone else or for other people, it's a sense that there is more in life, and that our loved ones can often see into our futures. Like there is something real about that, and that we're not just here kind of alone, stumbling around, which is often how I felt, like just alone and stumbling around as if there is nothing to look forward to, etc. And so when it came to the mediumship, it was that real healing that I found so amazing. And that's when I lived in Denver, Colorado, and two mediums from Wales were touring in the area. And I think it was on Facebook. There was a Facebook ad about mediums in Denver, and I clicked on it just out of curiosity. And I'm like, oh yeah, it'll be coming in up in April, and I'll be there. So I signed up, and so I had my first medium reading with Debs, and so she brought through my grandfather who passed away when I was about 4, and there was some accurate confirmations in terms of he showed a fish, and I said yes. The real only memory that I have of him is when we went fishing in New Jersey at a pond, and we caught this flounder, and so we were holding it up, and so things like that, and how he had been watching over me my whole life, even as I had no idea about it, and I hardly ever thought of him, but yet this whole time he was watching over me, and also helping to kind of protect me, especially when I was a teenager and I thought about suicide, to kind of guide me, on a healthier path. And then she talked about how I would be helping so many people, and this was before the NDE group, before I created it. But she said, you're going to be helping so many people, and she talked about how she's saying that you have a virtual life, because at that time I worked on the computer all day, then I came home and I was on the computer all night. And so he was encouraging me to get out more, and it was all true. And I said, yeah. And so anyway, there was accurate information there, and it was really inspiring. And so then she said, we actually also offer a training, and it's called the Accolade Academy. It was her and her husband, Paul, and they have this mediumship academy, and it's international. And so I signed up, and we had our local chapter there in Denver, and we practiced on each other, and it was really amazing to learn that what sometimes seems random or impossible in our mind is actually accurate. Like, oh, I see in my head, I see a trumpet. I don't know what it is. I say it, and that's what he played the trumpet. That is true. And then you learn that it's not always random. That there is something here, and that's what Debs and Paul teach, is that anyone can do this. What actually truly separates a real medium from someone with just intuition is that it's really about the heart and intent. Like, if you have an intent to serve and help people, and you use that in a way, like, you'll be a great medium. But if you're if your heart and your intention is not pure, it doesn't really work out, or it could cause harm. If someone is counting on you for important decision, and you kind of casually tell them something that's inaccurate or will get them off track. And so you have a lot of responsibility as a medium. So in the trainings, I realized how I could do this, and just like a lot of people. And then I started practicing on friends, and then eventually taking on paid clients. And it's really amazing, because sometimes I will see the person, and it's all in my mind's eye. And so I haven't ever seen like a physical apparition, but I know other mediums who have, and that, that it can happen. But I know oftentimes that it's all in my mind, but I'll see something, and just about accurately saying it and being that messenger. And sometimes you have to try to interpret it, like, well, I saw something, and how do I explain this? But what I love is how it can bring so much healing to people. And when I'm done with it, with a session or with a reading for someone, I feel a sense of like I played a part. I was part of uh, God here, and like actually making something healing and beautiful happen. And I love that feeling. And so here's an example, because I love that I'm a scientist as well, because scientists still will talk about the debunkers will say you are guessing, and you're trying to analyze a person, and then you come up with educated guesses of their age and gender and all this, and you say, well, because they're this, they probably will have something like this, and it's all just a trick. And so that's how the debunkers will explain, but they're incorrect, because when you do an actual reading, you turn your mind off. You close your eyes. You didn't have to know anything about the person. And actually, oftentimes that's better, because otherwise you might think, is that my mind, or is that from spirit? And so you turn your mind off. It's pure intuition. And so in that experience, I learned that intuition is so real. It's its own thing. And that it isn't about, oftentimes the debunkers will talk about how when people say, I hear a J name, you know, or when mediums will ask something like that, the debunkers will often pick on that as if they're just fishing for information. But no, because in readings, like one time I did a reading and just in my mind, the person on the Zoom, she wasn't even, I didn't know anything about her or she wasn't German. But in my head, I heard the word Schwarzwald and I wrote it down, Schwarzwald, and I looked it up and it's the Black Forest in Germany. And so I told her and she said yes, because I think it was her husband, he used to take her there and it was their favorite place. And so I was just amazed that I heard this word in another language and I had to actually look it up and it was all real. I always love um, those instances or situations.
Well, it is healthy for people to ask the questions, to have the scientific mindset, and I think that's what the debunkers are about. But at some point, you're going to realize that there's a lot more than that we don't know than what we do know. Thank you so much. That was amazing hearing you speak, and it's great to get to know the person behind the group. um, where can people get hold of you, Ned, if they wanted to connect?
Most often, find me on Facebook. Is if you type in Ned Matinnia, which is Matinnia, and you could also find me from the near death experiences group on Facebook. If you just type in near death experiences, and it's the one that has a picture of the cosmos and stars in the background, and we have about 275,000 members now. And there are others which have similar names. This will help to differentiate it. And I'm thinking like I'm planning to have a website for my services, but all that's in the future. And I'm also writing a book. I'm about 50 pages in, but it's all about my whole life in terms of my childhood and then my search for answers. And I go into more detail in everything that I've shared. Maybe next year.
Yeah, we look forward to it. Okay, well, I'll post the link below for Facebook. And then before we go, do you have a message for our viewers?
The biggest thing, what we talked about, is to overcome this spiritual apathy, or is to get involved. Right now in the U.S. and there is, I think it's other places, it's also trying to happen. There are people who want to divide us and for us to be angry at each other, but there are far more loving and kind people who are trying to do the right thing than there are agitators or people who are trying to turn people against each other. And so it's imperative right now to support each other. And I say supporting each other, even between our neighbors or communities, but also voting, because it's not a waste of time, or it's important to get involved. Um, you know, uh, Even if our communities are holding hands and supporting each other, if at the national levels, the people with the power and the militaries and tanks are using that against us, we have to kind of take control, spiritual and loving control of our governments as well as our communities. And so, and realizing that the government is not evil or bad, we are all part of the government. We can actually think about and come up with healthier ways of being, and just remembering that we're all in this together.